The Office of Budget Responsibility is going to slash its growth forecast, we hear. Some say by as much as a half. You have no fiscal headroom left. Just how serious is the country's financial situation?
As a result of that stability, interest rates have been cut 3 times since the general election. That's a far cry from the 11% inflation and the interest rate hikes that we saw under the previous government. And we can all see that before our eyes. And government are not inactive in that. We'll respond to the change and continue to meet our fiscal rules, but we're also shaping the new world.
Rachel Reeves just had what many are calling her Liz Truss moment on national television. The Chancellor's mask slipped as she desperately tried to convince viewers that the economy is improving, while dismissing evidence from the Joseph Roundtree Foundation showing living standards are plummeting. Watching her squirm under basic questioning about rising energy bills and food costs has left millions of Brits asking, is she genuinely unaware of our struggles, or is she deliberately gaslighting the public? In this video, we're analyzing every uncomfortable moment of her meltdown and what it reveals about Labour's economic strategy. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. Did you catch that moment on the Trevor Phillips Show when Rachel Reeves visibly tensed up?
Inflation was on its way down when you came in. It's actually slightly ticking back up. But the point I really wanted to ask you about is to describe how serious you think it is.
Living standards in the last Parliament were the worst ever on record. The Office of Budget Responsibility forecast, the Office of Budget Responsibility forecast in October that living standards would increase at double the rate in this Parliament. I reject that.
You think they're just wrong?
I reject that, and the Office of Budget Responsibility will set out their forecast this week.
It wasn't just an awkward television exchange. It was the physical manifestation of a chancellor confronted with economic realities she desperately wanted to avoid, as Phillips presented her with evidence from the Joseph Roundtree Foundation predicting a catastrophic fall in living standards. Reeves didn't just disagree, she outright rejected the findings with a dismissive confidence that bordered on theatrical. The disconnect was jarring. There sat the Chancellor, insisting that wages were rising, the economy was improving, and living standards were on an upward trajectory. Meanwhile, across Britain, millions of families were making impossible choices between heating their homes and feeding their children. This wasn't just a difference of opinion, it was 2 entirely different realities colliding on national television. What makes Reeves's performance particularly troubling is that the Joseph Roundtree Foundation isn't some fringe organization with an axe to grind. Their research meticulously documents the growing economic hardship facing British households, particularly those already struggling to stay afloat. When confronted with their findings, Reeves could have acknowledged the challenges while outlining her plans to address them. Instead, she chose to pretend the problems simply don't exist. Even more damning is the contradiction between Reeves's rosy outlook and the stark warnings from the Office for Budget Responsibility. The OBR, an independent watchdog specifically created to provide unbiased economic forecasts, has predicted one of the worst declines in living standards on record. This isn't partisan speculation, it's the assessment of the very institution established to cut through political spin and provide objective economic analysis.
There's a clear change of tone at conference. You know, the doom and gloom is sort of giving away to a bit more of the future. I mean, how happy and optimistic are you feeling now?
I've never been more optimistic about our country's future. And the last few years, instability and chaos has held back our country, but now we are returning stability to our public finances, and we're making the pro-business, the pro-growth reforms. Well, I had a choice to make when I learnt of the inheritance and the £22 billion black hole in the public finances. I could have either continued with the Conservative approach of covering that up, or I could have been honest and transparent with people.
The Chancellor's refusal to engage with these inconvenient truths reveals either a worrying ignorance of economic realities or a calculated decision to mislead the public. Either scenario raises serious questions about her fitness for the role. A Chancellor who doesn't understand the economic challenges facing the country cannot hope to address them effectively, and one who understands but chooses to deny them has abandoned the fundamental responsibility of public service. Consider what's actually happening on the ground. Inflation may have eased from its peak, but at around 10%, it's still outpacing wage growth of 5 to 6%. This simple arithmetic explains why so many Britons feel poorer despite Reeves's claims of improvement. When the cost of groceries, energy, and housing all climb faster than incomes, living standards inevitably fall. This isn't complex economic theory. It's the everyday reality millions experience when they check their bank accounts after paying their bills. The public reaction to Reeves's claims speaks volumes.
The scale of the challenge and how the path ahead is harder and steeper than we could have envisaged on the 4th of July. I thought it was right to be open and honest, but also set out a path to bring stability back to the public finances. I know we can bring that investment back to Britain to grow our economy, to improve living standards and bring good jobs, paying decent wages right across our country.
Okay, so let's look at your growth strategy. I mean, what is your plan?
We need to boost investment, both public and private. The Treasury that I now run needs to take into account the benefits, not just the costs of investment, and we need to leverage in that private sector investment.
Social media exploded with accusations that she was gaslighting ordinary citizens about economic conditions. One particularly striking comment captured the sentiment: if only optimism could pay the bills, if only confidence could reduce the cost of groceries, if only political rhetoric could fill up the tank at the petrol station. This wasn't just anger. It was the frustration of people who felt their lived experiences were being invalidated by someone who should be working to improve their situation. For working families across Britain, Reeves's economic fantasy bears no resemblance to their daily struggle. Take the increasing number of full-time workers relying on food banks, a phenomenon that would have been unthinkable a generation ago, or consider the growing ranks of the working poor. People who put in full weeks of labor yet still cannot afford basic necessities. These aren't abstract statistics. There are neighbors, colleagues, and community members facing genuine hardship while their chancellor tells them things are looking up. The question becomes whether Reeves's dismissal of these realities stems from genuine ignorance or deliberate calculation. Is she truly unaware of the financial pressures facing ordinary Britons? Or has she made a political decision to deny these hardships in service of a more optimistic narrative? Neither explanation reflects well on her leadership. A chancellor disconnected from economic realities cannot effectively address them, and one who deliberately misleads the public about their suffering has abandoned the most basic responsibility of public service. The gap between Reeves's economic assertions and the documented evidence couldn't be wider. While she speaks of improvement and progress, independent forecasters predict continued decline. While she celebrates rising wages, inflation continues to erode purchasing power. While she dismisses warnings about falling living standards, millions of Britons experience that very reality every day. This isn't just a difference of perspective. It's the difference between evidence-based assessment and political wishful thinking. The most telling aspect of Reeves's approach isn't just her economic optimism, it's her deliberate dismissal of expert warnings. When confronted with the Joseph Roundtree Foundation's evidence predicting declining living standards, she simply waved it away, insisting the economy was improving. This refusal to acknowledge reality isn't merely poor politics, it represents a fundamental leadership failure. Instead of addressing the genuine hardships facing Britons, Reeves has chosen spin over substance. Her focus remains on crafting a narrative rather than confronting uncomfortable truths. This approach doesn't just undermine her credibility, it erodes public trust in economic leadership precisely when it's most needed. The British public deserves better.